Clyde Miller, you came to Dallas from Oklahoma City years ago. I won't say how many. What made you decide to make the move from Oklahoma City to Dallas and Channel 13?
Well, I heard about Ralph Rogers and the great things that he was planning to do with the station down there in Dallas. I always knew Dallas was a great place to move up to, because that's where we always went whenever we wanted to have a really nice weekend or do some good shopping. So it just seemed like the thing to do.
And what year was that?
1968.
Okay, but so that means that when you came here, the cameras that we see in the studio today were not here, right?
No, it's been about 4 generations of cameras since that.
What kind of, when you saw the facilities, because I remember when I first came here in those Quonset huts and little buildings, were you convinced that you had made the right move when you saw the facility?
When I first saw it, I was convinced that I could help this station.
Well, you did.
Well, this station needed some help.
There was no place to go but up. I can do some good here.
And those original cameras were from Channel 8, weren't they?
Yes, the station had acquired those in a little package of equipment along with the building, cast-off stuff from Channel 8 whenever they moved down to Broadcast Center.
Do you by any chance remember, or you, Bob Ray, the time we were taping a couple of Christmas shows for the holidays? The station foolishly gave a holiday party before these tapings, and the cameraman began to pass out in drunken stupors. And there would be nobody left to run the camera. And yet we were taping the show.
You got to say, Lee, that in those days when we had station parties, there was liquor at the station party, at the Christmas party.
Bob Wilson was the general manager when I came, and he was, what, 29 years old.
And Irish. I mean, the Irish believe
just,
in good parties.
Just out of Dartmouth and down here. And his idea of a celebration was go get a keg the first Christmas Eve that I was here. I recall Bob said, hey, it's Christmas Eve. Somebody go get a keg. So we opened it up in the studio, and that was Christmas.
And that's what happened. The cameraman began passing out.
Yeah, I can remember Lee. I was watching, and Lee was sitting at the head of the table, and I saw her eyes started moving. But I looked over, but the camera was just slowly moving away. It was just going somewhere. But those were the days. But we always had parties, even the first auction. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, especially after it was over.
Oh.
You know, and I usually didn't stick around for those after auction parties because I was getting a little old for it even then, but I've heard some stories.
But you had to take because the auction wasn't here in those days.
The first couple of auctions we had were at Valley View, and what we had to start with was a clean storefront, nothing in it, absolutely nothing, no power, no electricity, no lights, anything.
What did you do?
Because we had to go out there and build a studio, and that first year we disinstalled all of our camera equipment and our switchers and everything else. Took that out there because we didn't have a remote truck. We couldn't afford to buy one or rent one. So that stuff was never the same after that outing. But
that may be what went wrong. You know, we were having another show once, and this was a live show, Bob Ray, when you couldn't turn back. You were on the air. And we had 3 cameras for the show, as we have today for this taping. And one by one, all the cameras went out but one. I mean, we had a whole table full of 6 or 8 people and one camera trying to cover
that
all.
was typical newsroom, wasn't it?
That certainly was.
One camera always went out, it seemed.
Yeah.
I mean, so we were always with 2, but as you said, on that particular day, we only had one.
Yeah.
But do you remember the day, and I'm sure you do, when shortly before taping, the studio caught on fire? Or that studio caught on fire?
I have to confess I was responsible for that.
What happened?
Oh, wait a minute. We're getting a confession out of you?
What did you do? Was it arson?
I don't have much to lose at this point. For some reason, I was back there in the other studio where the newsroom was set up, checking for a power problem, and opened up the electrical panel, and here was a breaker that was tripped. It was red, it obviously had tripped. So what you do when you find those is you reset them. When I reset this one, fire flew out up there someplace, and it raced across the studio ceiling, and there was dust that had accumulated up there, and the installation and stuff like that.
And asbestos, as I recall.
It wasn't asbestos.
Really?
No,
Well, that's
no.
a
We all thought it was because it was always
Yeah.
falling, and
Yeah.
we were doing stories on asbestos in those days.
As we had remodeled the studio when we started Newsroom, and we sprayed in cellulose. It was essentially ground up newspapers. And it was supposed to be fireproof, but by then it wasn't obviously.
But do you remember what
fireproof.
we did to get the show on the air? Because we didn't do it. We didn't do the show from here. We all went over to the radio studio.
Right.
And we broadcast the sound, and we had one photo with the camera showing the burned out studio
Yeah.
on for that 30 minutes. But but somehow, I don't even know how we did it in those days, but we actually did the show from the radio station.
Yeah. And
Now, you've worked under 4 station managers. Bob Wilson, you've mentioned, the first manager, then Ed Pfister, then
Pfister.
Richie Meyer, and now Cheryl Craigie.
Right.
Now, how would you characterize each of them
Oh, my
from your
gosh.
point of view?
Oh, you put me on the spot
But Barney's
here.
told
I'm
us
still
that-
working here for a few more days.
Okay, you already told us Bob
Well, but
Wilson
they-
was a
but they've all been
drunkard.
wonderful.
No.
No, they've all
Oh
been
no,
wonderful.
I love Bob Wilson. He was a
So
great
did I.
guy. He was more fun.
Huge
I have to say
imagination.
that of all of them, Bob Wilson was the most fun.
And had great imagination, still has great imagination.
Yes, a very creative guy.
Yeah.
And he was always asking me. He said, "Who's your most creative engineer?" And I said, "Well, I think that's an oxymoron."
You were.
But that you never knew what to expect from Bob Wilson. He was always looking for something exciting for the station to do, and he wanted to really make a difference. That was his objective. Ralph Rogers brought him over here. I think he was Ralph's administrative assistant or something. And Ralph saw the potential in him, the creativity, and brought him, put him in charge of the station. And it was never a dull moment during the. And I think when it started to get a little dull, he moved on. I think that was when he decided to make a change.
Well, Ed Pfister was also a Ralph Rogers assistant too, wasn't he, at some point?
He was Ralph's assistant in Washington when Ralph was head of PBS up there.
Yeah.
And we all know how he saved PBS, and they put him in charge of it for a few years. So Ed was his right-hand man up there.
And Ed really pushed national production.
Ed spent a lot of
recall?
time in Washington and other parts out of town looking for money for us.
And you did
And
with
did pretty
Ossie
well.
Ruby?
We did with Ossie and Ruby and
yeah,
did it
those days.
out of the studio. And of course, travel around the country to do it. Don't know
Wow,
how we
that
did
was-
it to this
That's
day.
unbelievable that we did that. That we accomplished
for 2
that.
years, 2
with,
seasons.
With big sets, magnificent sets, and top talent in the country.
Well, great stars from all over. In fact, Ossie and Ruby have a book out this year, and they talk about that experience in there.
I'd bet they never forget it. There were dressing rooms that they had were in the makeshift second floor rooms back there in the prop storage.
And the prop storage, but for them that was great. They had their own dressing room. And,
had a window unit air conditioner and
but even before that, Clyde, I mean, the station was pioneering something. Women's golf, or mixed
women's tennis.
mixed doubles, and things like that, and we proved that it could be done. It seems to me.
We developed it, and then the big guys jumped in and took it over. That happened
And
to
we
us.
did Dan Foster, MD.
Oh yeah.
And you remember then MD came along, and Bryce Howard and David Dow were here working on it. And we used to bring in stars to host MD. And once we brought in Cyd Charisse, who was a great dancer, you'll recall.
Yes.
And she delivered her lines to camera. And afterwards I asked Bryce, how did it go? And ever tactful, he said it would have been better if she had danced.
Oh, there have been a lot of big names passed through here
That's right.
over the years.
And a
Worked
lot
on
of their
our
names
productions.
there on that studio
That's
door
priceless,
there,
that door.
right?
Yeah.
You taking that with you?
No, but I plan to come back and look at it a lot.
Well, you should. Now, who have been the real characters at Channel 13?
Well, one that always comes to my mind is James Washington.
Yes.
And, he was custodian.
He was
Right.
wonderful.
But we all remember One Star Theater, right?
I certainly remember it came on very late at night on a Sunday night
Or Saturday night.
or Saturday night, and James had the opening scene, right?
Yeah, James pushed in the trash barrel and picked the projector up out of there and set it up and pushed the button, and we rolled the movie.
The worst
which
movie we
was the
could find.
worst movie. So I believe Ron DeVilliers was program director at the time, in charge of programming.
And
And
Ron
he-
brought Monty Python.
Oh yes, I'll
to
never
the
forget
station.
the
He brought it to the U.S.
never
through this
forget the
station.
day that happened. Actually, the day it was introduced to the station, and maybe Lee or maybe both of you were in that meeting in the old conference room, which is now the men's restroom. We were having a president's staff meeting or whatever they called it at the time, and Ron said, "I've got something I want you people to see," and he said, "I don't know quite what to make of it," and he rolled a Monty Python. And the scene I remember is the one where they keep charging out the door with their blunderbusses, going in there. And we watched it, and a little excerpt from it, and everybody just kind of gave it a blank look.
But it was a huge hit.
Yeah, and
Big hit.
I don't think it was overwhelmingly received in that group, but we eventually came around. After we watched some more of it, we said, "Hey, this stuff is really funny, and it's different," and that's what Channel 13's always been about.
And in fact, I think they remembered this station because even after they had gone into syndication or some, on commercial stations, Channel 13 was the first station, I think, to get it back.
And certainly they remember Ron DeVilliers because I think he has the rights to it and sells it around the world.
He was always an intelligent man,
Yes,
creative
he was.
and intelligent.
What I remember about you, Clyde, it seems like in those early days, you were always on the way to fix something, whether it was in here or out at the transmitter or whatever. And maybe those days are gone. I mean, maybe you don't have to do that anymore. But in those early days, something was always broken.
Well, it's still that way. Fortunately, I have a little better equipped in the way of a staff these days, and and I think things are better. Certainly, the equipment's more reliable than it used to be.
And then Richie Meyer took the station even farther into national programming. He did
Right.
The West of the Imagination. Pat Perini worked on that.
Right.
The Catherine Ann Porter series, that was another of her projects. And those were important years.
Absolutely.
And he also, and technically took it to another, because I remember he got a backup transmitter for the station, and suddenly we were out trying to get Channel 2. I know you were involved in that fight,
Oh
weren't
boy,
you?
you would have to bring that up.
Oh, yeah. But, yeah. That was sort of nasty in the beginning, wasn't it?
It was okay starting off, and it seemed like everybody was on board. Originally started when the officials of the Dallas County Community College District came over to us and said, came to one of our board meetings, and they said, we need more airtime, and we plan to build Channel 2. We'd really rather you build Channel 2, but if you don't do it, we're going to. And so, of course, that was a challenge to us, and Bob Wilson took it off and ran with it, and straight to Ralph Rogers, and Ralph saw the value in it too. So, and we did go to the community leaders in Denton. We talked to the community leaders up there, and we thought we had them all on board. And unfortunately, a crusading newspaper reporter got the idea that we were trying to steal their channel up there at some point, and people started changing their minds, and that's when it got messy and turned into a legal battle. They applied for a construction permit in opposition to us, and so they were face to face for 10 years. Nothing happened essentially except the lawyers made money.
What eventually got them to see the light?
I actually finally came to a hearing, comparative hearing up there, and Richie Meyer and I went up there and testified at that, and I'll never forget that one, but we lost it. They gave it to the Denton people, and then I think it sunk in on them that we're going to have to build a station. We're going to have to raise the money, and this is expensive.
And Ralph Rogers is a master fundraiser.
Yeah, and so they started rethinking the situation, and they came back to us and said, maybe we can work out a compromise. We want certain things. We want it to be a Denton license instead of Flower Mound, like we were going to have it licensed for complicated reasons. But so we said okay, and we worked out a compromise, and then we had to build it. And then
That meant you had to build it.
And then our tower was gone. And our tower site was gone. There was no place to build a tower. And, so then followed, like you say, all the technical gyrations we had to go through, and we got it done by 1988. It's never been as high up on the towers at Cedar Hill as the other stations, and never looked quite as good as I would have liked it to, but there's hope. We may make it yet.
We've talked about some other people. I'm thinking about at least 3 other people who were not so much characters, but almost institutions unto themselves in those days. D. Taft, who's gone, Renata Cole, and My Men, who was here for a long time. All of those people are pretty close to you, weren't they?
Yeah. I have fond memories of all those people. There's still hardly a day goes by here that I don't think about D. Taft and something he said.
I know. Well, he kept the station afloat. I mean, he was the business manager. He had to pay the bills.
At times,
and he did it.
There were times we didn't have money to make the payroll. Then we had to go to the bank and borrow money to make the payroll. Not recently, but.
Yeah, and of course, and a lot of people didn't understand, you know, when the money got tight and Dee was saying no to special kind of requests, all we knew is that we wanted to go out and make a program, and Dee was saying you couldn't do it. But he was the one seeing those bank statements every month.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he had a difficult job, but he did it very well.
I remember one of his analogies. People would come to him and want to buy something. You know, they'd make this compelling case that they just had to have some new project, production, or piece of equipment or something like that. And he would say, well, why don't I just take all the money and put it in a big tub and sit it out there outside my office and let everybody come take what they need. That was one of his favorites.
Clyde, when you think back over all the years, is there one year, is there one moment that stands out especially for you after, 31 years or so?
Well, I think when we started Newsroom, that certainly was a landmark that anybody who was here at the time, that's going to be impressed in their memory. All the excitement and all the new people and all the really smart people that were coming in here, and we were really going to make a change, and we did make changes. And I think those few years that it lasted were among the high points here at the station.
Well, you've been working with Cheryl Craigie, who's been here 2 years, and doing a wonderful job.
Yeah.
How is she going to get along without you? What are the two of you been doing together, and how is she going to manage without you?
Oh, I love Cheryl. We have a great relationship, and she's a great person, a great manager. She'll do fine. Cheryl has already dealt with probably more challenges since she came here than her entire career in commercial broadcasting, I'd guess. And so this is just another little one. But I told her that I would help her out in any way that I can. And I may come in and continue to help out on a consulting basis on a couple of projects that we have going.
Do you remember Sam Hudson?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And very creative kind of a producer, or I guess he was all around producer, talent, writer. What was it? The history of the water closet.
Yes.
That production there.
Yeah, he did that one. He did one on architecture. I remember.
It was actually very good. Who built this place?
Who built this place?
It was very good.
He was excellent. A little crazy.
The story about the time he rented a room at the Stoneleigh and painted the whole thing red, all the furniture, the walls, the ceiling. He just painted it all red. So he wanted a monochromatic scene for some reason. So.
And how did the Stoneleigh feel about that?
Well, I think he made arrangements.
Oh, I see.
And
Well,
of
I'm
course you
glad
had
of
to
that.
pay to get it redecorated after it was over.
Yeah, he did tend to go over budget sometimes, as I recall.
Yeah, there have been quite a few people around here that had that problem in the production area, but...
Well, now, Clyde, what was the worst disaster over which you had to preside?
The worst disaster? Well, I can't say that we've had any really terrible disasters. We've had several power failures, which tended to be kind of bad. You know, even recently we're still having those every once in a while. I suppose that fire was just about the worst one at the time. It seemed so at the time.
We haven't mentioned radio much, but I remember when radio was first coming into being.
1974.
1974. There were a lot of people who thought that was a big mistake, that here was a television station who couldn't pay for itself. How was it going to pay for a radio station at the same time?
Well, I didn't hear too much of that kind of talk. I mean, Ralph Rogers, once you went to him with an idea that seemed to have potential for the community, he didn't seem to be too concerned with how it's going to pay for itself. And so he got on board early. Bob Wilson was still here when we started the radio. And as I recall, we had been approached by an outside group who wanted us to essentially raise the money and let them operate the build the station and let them operate it. Ralph said, "We're not about to do that." So we got started and hired Bruce McKenzie.
Successful.
It is very successful.
And you ran it.
Had no idea what I was doing. Yeah, I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I loved it, and that was the main thing about everybody who was involved in both stations. I think we were all learning. I came here, Lee, you hired me, and I didn't know anything.
I ever did.
I didn't know anything about television, but we were given a chance to learn, and I think that was the most important thing about this place.
One of the most exciting mediums that we have. I get more comments, I think, from people that I know about things they heard on 90.1 and what they saw on Channel 13 or Channel 2 still, even to this day.
So Clyde, what are you going to do when you retire?
Well, I'm hoping that every day is going to be kind of like Saturday morning. We'll read the paper, drink some coffee, and decide what I'm going to do that day. And as far as any firm plans, I don't really have any. Plan to continue to live where I do now in Irving. Have a son and a daughter who live nearby. My son has 2 grandsons for me. Sandy and I enjoy spending a little time with them at least once a week. And I like building things. I've always liked building things. So I built a room on my own house, and I'm going to do some home repair projects and probably some repairs for the neighbors. And I got a cabin up in northwest Arkansas, an old farmstead up there. I could spend years fixing that place up. So plan to spend a little time.
And you're going to be
there.
doing some projects here at Channel 13, we hope.
I hope so. Yeah, looking forward to that, because I can't bear to, tear away from it completely. I just can't see life without it.
Well, you're part of the soul of the station, and I'm just glad that I had a chance to spend some time with you.
Well, thank you, Bob Ray.
I certainly feel the same way, Clyde.
Thank you,
Channel
Bob.
13 would never have worked without you, and neither would KERA FM, and neither would Channel 2.
I couldn't have had a better life than I've had here in career. That's honest to feel that way.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bo.
That was good.
The carpenter shop, which was their storage room, and one of those newsroom vehicles was parked right there in the way, in the driveway, and James was going to get it done one way or another, so he got in there and started that wagon up to move it, put it in reverse, and he got it going real good, but he couldn't find the brake pedal when it came time to stop, so he hit the